Swami Shivanand, Anandamayi Ma, Kripal Singh. These were amazing spiritual teachers. Yeah? And our parents, you know, when we were here studying in school, the weekend was our parents would just pick us up and take us for the discourses. You know, that's what our weekend entertainment was. So it kind of seeped in. And my father, you know, was a forest officer when the person who started Transcendental Movement, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, wanted an ashram in Rishikesh. And my father was in charge of the forest. So he gave him a lease, I think, of 20, 30 years or whatever it was. That's where the Beatles used to come and stay because they were followers of Mahesh Yogi. So when you ask me about, you know, for me, the integrity of nature is a spiritual recognition of the sacred of nature. The protection of the biodiversity and integrity is a sacred duty. Then, of course, I have scientific analysis to be able to do the debates with those who are pushing the other side. But I personally don't need a scientific analysis to know that a toxic gene introduced into a plant will change the self-organizing capacity of that plant. You know, that comes from the integrity, you know, the trust in the fact that nature has integrity.
Taking that question forward, where do you draw your energy from with all this negativity and bad press given to you? Where do you draw your sustenance?
Well, I don't take the bad press as my yardstick for truth. You know, I take, my parents were wonderful, you know, they left me with so much. Like my dad said, I remember I was doing, I don't know if I told you about the mining study on it. So when you talk about CHIPCO and its repercussions, I had been asked by the Ministry of Environment to do a study on mining in these mountains because Indira Gandhi had come and said the Queen of the Hills, Mussoorie is called Queen of the Hills. She said Queen of the Hills is being stripped naked. So, you know, that's when the ministries act. You know, Prime Minister says something, they suddenly remember what they're supposed to do. And they couldn't find, I mean, we were very few of us at that time, 82. So they asked us to do the study. And my normal process is, I say the people who feel the pinch are the ones who know. You know? So I went to the villages to ask what was the issue. For everyone in government, it was about the hills are looking ugly. I went to the women, they said it's about water. So I started to study hydrogeology, cast limestone. Now these caves in limestone are the water bodies. And we managed, you know, the study we did led to a Supreme Court case and the mining was banned. Because we could show the economy of nature was bigger than the economy of mining. And the day the Supreme Court judgment came and all these mines were stopped, I got a group of women walking into my office, which used to be my mother's cow shed. You know, my office is where our cows used to live. My mother gave it to me. She said, when you want to leave your job, just take this place and do what you need to do and let your conscience be your guide. So during that period when I was doing the mining study, I would get huge threats from the mining lobby. And one day I got a call saying, you're leaving your 80-year-old father and your 8-month baby alone. And stop going to the field because one day you'll come back and find them both gone. So I told my dad, I said, you know, this is the call I got. And my dad said, as long as you follow your conscience and do your duty, there is no power that can harm you. Go and do your work. And, you know, so that kind of became my teacher, that you have to basically turn to your conscience as your guide at every point. And the rest, you know, I mean, yeah, they take your website away, they take your communication away, they've robbed me of, I used to have 3 columns in 3 major newspapers of this country, and they're gone. And those newspapers are now propaganda pieces, platforms. Yeah, so you know that none of this is permanent. Yeah. But I was talking about the women, no? And then the women came and said, why did you leave our mine without the ban? So we said, you know, your mine wasn't even in the government map, because we got the map of the mines from the government and your mine wasn't on it. Totally illegal mine. So they said, if we do a chipko of the mountains, will you join us? Sure. I said, of course. I'd tie my baby. My father made a sweet little, you know, the fancy things you get in America. I said, you know, they put the kid here and there's some kind of straps. And my dad stitched a beautiful navy blue, you know, and I should tie him up and climb the mountain. And again, talking about, you know, so I just get threats, but these women were attacked. And I get a call from a village boy saying the women have been attacked. So I rush down. And rush down means what? Take a jeep and then walk 8 miles. So walked and I thought I'd go to the homes and the women would be bandaged and sitting with their arms in a plaster. And sure enough, they were in plasters and bandages. But they were sitting in the tent, in the Satyagraha tent. And this is all very powerful. Because Itwari Devi was a 65-year-old woman who had led this campaign. She's no more. And Itwari was there, all bandaged up. And I said to her, you know, how do you get this Shakti? To be here, being brutalized, you've been beaten, and you're still sitting here. And she said something I've never forgotten. She says, we're walking on the grass grows right back. We take leaves from the trees, the leaves come right back. The Shakti in nature that allows the renewal of life is the Shakti in us that allows us to sit here again. You know, Chipko was about recovering the commons of the forest. The dam fights and still are recovering the commons of the rivers. Because in a way, dams are a privatization, whether it be of energy or irrigation. Because, you know, the water that supports everyone then becomes available only to a few. For me, seed was the ultimate issue of a commons. Because for me, the seed is not just a commons for the human community, it's a commons for the web of life. You know, the seeds are what are food for the pollinators. The seed that becomes the plant is food for the soil organisms. So when you privatize the seed and make it toxic, you're taking literally the food away from the web of life. And anything that is shared in its very existence is a commons. Yeah? So Roman law was, you know, the rivers, the beaches, they have to be shared, they can't be privatized. Privatization begins with colonialism. I don't know how many of you are aware. In India, you could not own the land as private property. You had use rights to land, but not ownership rights to land. Yeah? So, and the use rights were dependent on how much you used. And as long as there were use rights, women's rights and men's rights were the same because both worked on the fields. Then, one of the Governor Generals of India, I think 1792, just wrote a letter saying all the land of soil of India is the property of the British. Just like that. And so the land on which people had use rights, and it was a commons in terms of the property right, now became the property of, at that point, East India Company, later the British Empire. And now the original peasants had to pay royalties. This was the famous Lagan. For those of you who've seen the film called Lagan, you know, Amir Khan. Lagan was the rent that was paid to the British. Now they used to, and the Lagan was not just the harvest of that year. Because if you had a drought here and you had to give half the harvest, you'd still have half. But they took the average and had the peasants give that harvest equivalent in cash. So if you had a bad year, you don't have a harvest to be able to convert into cash. And farmers were literally dying and they were of famine. That's why if you look at the conversion of the land into private property, that's when the famines began. And According to different reports, 40 to 60 million peasants died of famine in the British years. 200 years, that's short 2 years. And the last big famine was the Great Bengal famine, 1942. And Amartya Sen has written in his book that there was no lack of food, it was just lack of access to the food that they had grown because of the Lagan. And so women started a movement in Bengal called Tebhaga. You know, take 1/3, leave 2/3 for us. You know, Tebhaga means 3. And the beautiful slogan, powerful slogan, they'd stand in front of their rice with jhadus. Yeah? And the other side were the police and the army with guns and bayonets. And the women are saying, Jaan debo, dhan debo na. We will give our lives, we will not give you our rice. Same attitude as the Chipko women. We'll give our lives, but we'll not let you destroy this forest. And I think this is the foundational interconnectedness that you're looking at. So how do you realize you're not separate? Stop breathing. Let's see how long you can stay without breath. I know, I mean, Sundarlal Bahuguna would go on these fasts, 45 days, 50 days, then it'd be an emergency, rush to hospitals. But, you can go without food 45 days, but you can't go without water 45 days. That's why you always have to have a little bit of water. Some people can go very long without food because they have very powerful capacities to generate their energy, but even food. So, I mean, I'd say just take the 3 systems that is life, our breath, our water, our food, and track the connection. Track the connection of your breath to the trees and the oxygen they give us. Track the connections to the forests and the water they give us. Track the connection to the soil and the food the soil gives us, and the nourishment in the food that the soil gives us. So, this connection is basically what spirituality is about. But this connection is what good science, that is not biased to keep predating on nature, allows us to see. I mean, there's so much new work, people talking about the entangled life, that we are one with the soil, and then they track all the way that, our health and the soil's health is one health.